So why Uungwana? Why this particular concept? Well, 16 or 17 years ago, at SOAS, while we were waiting for Rida to come and join us, the entire stream of Swahili studies was taught by 3 people. And I don't think it has happened before, and it will never happen again in the history of SOAS. And that is, the 3 people were Abdul Latif, the late Nasser Malik of the BBC, and me. And the 3 of us were together and we exchanged views. Subsequently, Abdul Latif moved to here. And I think on one of his visits, when I invited him to talk to the class, he chose to speak on Uungwana, transmitted. And then the process starts all over again. Now, in Swahili studies, I think it is about time that we took stock. Quite a lot of anthropologists, historians, lexicographers, linguists, literary critics, and so on, have been studying Swahili language, people, literature for the last 7 decades, of course, earlier as well. But in this, so to speak, modern era, they have been studying Swahili. And therefore, the question which I have is this: is there a way of constructing a framework to study the process of this knowledge construction out of the material that has been gathered? So I thought perhaps what I could do is to posit a very simple framework. You have a concept. The concept over time changes. At the same time, on a parallel stream, you have that concept being studied. And that scholarship also undergoes a change in time. Now, I have applied this little thing long ago to an article that I published, in an article that I published on Swahili as a religious language. And in there, I looked at that okay, when we have a religious concept, now the concept of light, it comes into in this case, among the Swahili, it started off with Islam, and the word which was used was nuru. And now the term nuru then replaced, or rather not replaced, but then was side by side with the word mwangaza. And then came Christianity. And you had the Reverend Rule in his Stuttgart Bible. He changed it to mwangaza. So you begin to see a little bit of the concept then of the nuru in the Quran and the concept of the mwangaza in the Bible beginning to have a little sort of change. But that's just one example. The second is to look at the type of what in the old days used to be called the inside and the outside perspective. And that is the source of knowledge. Is it from the inside, what used to, in anthropological debate till recently, called native and non-native? And in anthropology, you have also the idea of reflexivity. That is the way that your own position, whether you are an insider or an outsider, reflects not only the data you gather, but also the type of analysis that you make. The third is the question of time, i.e., are you drawing from old sources, historical and traditional, or are you drawing from quote-unquote modern sources which are more recent, and what is the sort of implication of those both? And finally, something which I've called the X factor, and that is your own interpretation. What you, as a scholar, whether you are inside or outside, looking at old material or new material, what are you injecting into the material that you have? Now, in order to make this sort of understandable, I've taken sort of the handout which Abdul Latif gave at SOAS, and which he recently very kindly again provided to me. And we look at these dictionary entries of Uungwana. Okay, this is from Kraft. So the year 1882, and to him, a Uungwana is a free man, not a slave. So immediately you have a positive definition and you have a negative one. Okay, in other words, he's a free man, not a slave. Free men hold together, so he's going to the etymology of Uungwana, assist each other in word, kalima, and in everything, but slaves do not. This is actually an explanation which was given to him. Do not and cannot, because they are dependent on their master and cannot join others. Okay, and therefore, by the same token, what is Uungwana? Uungwana, therefore, is freedom, the state or condition of a free man, and the opposite is utuma, this is exactly how it was there, not that there was any typology on my part, and the state of slavery. So that was one. Then you have Johnson, 1935. Mtu, again, number one is a negative one. Mtu asiye mtumwa. What is a muungwana? Number two, mtu mwenye adabu na malezi mazuri. And therefore, ungwana, ustaarabu, hali ya kuwa na tabia ya kiungane. That is the dictionary. And then we have, again, 1939, again, that Kamusi Kiswahili again, a free man. Now, note the word formally. This is very important. 1939, he's talking of formally, commonly, contrasted with mtumwa, slave, one relatively high in the social grade, and so a person of good breeding, an accomplished, civilized person, in the hinterland often used of any person who professes to be a Mohammedan and wears a kanzu. And then Kiungwana, the speech bearing characteristics of a free man, gentleman, lady, also the name given in the hinterland, sometimes for Kiswahili, Kiungwana, well-bred, educated, civilized. And then it finishes with usually contracted to Uungwana, condition, status, etc. Now usually denoting a relatively, usually denoting, now 1939, usually denoting a relatively high social rank, and so good breeding, education, accomplishments, etc., etc. In contrast with Ushenzi, which is barbarism. Okay, and then 1981, first in 1939, mtumwa, sasa it is reversed. Number one, mtu mwenye adabu na desturi njema, mtu anayekaa na binadamu wenziwe kwa uzuri, mtu mwenye utu, ada ya kunena ni kitendo. Mtu asiye mtumwa, jina la heshima analoitwa mtu. Okay? And uungwana ni hali ya muungwana, and this is from the taasisi ya Kiswahili, uchunguzi wa Kiswahili dictionary, right? And then 1992, mtu mstaarabu, mtu anayefanya mambo ya sawa na kupatana pamoja na kushirikiana na wenziwe, mtu mwenye tabia nzuri. That aspect, the negative aspect of mtumwa, is gone. Okay, from in this one. Uungwana, ustaarabu, utu, hali ya kufanya mambo kama anavyostahili. So there you are. You see the different concepts of change that we have seen. Okay, now There is a study which was by Kai Kresse, which you've got the handout, which you can see. Hope all of you have it. Now, I have drawn on Kai's work, and that is 2007. Now, you have here now these, if I apply that to the book Philosophizing in Mombasa, there are statements which are made. Now, I'm not commenting on these statements whether they are right or wrong. What I'm commenting on is what is the process that has led to these statements. So you have the first statement, there is no Uungwana without utumwa. Okay, now what is this based on? Okay, secondly, the same thing that we have seen in the dictionary, a Swahili is someone who is linked to the dependency system of utumwa. Now in that chart, I would say that this is probably number 3, where you are putting it in the historical context. So these are the 2 statements. And then one more, which is exactly the X factor, the one which, this is Kai Kresse's construction, where there is one word which is now being introduced, okay, which was not there before in the other definitions, and that is the word serf. So now you have here is, what is utumwa? It is serfdom and slavery. So what is a serf? Who is a serf? And where does this come from? Okay, now, I have looked at the materials, and the nearest I can come to in terms of the word serf is when you look at a feudal system, let us say in the West, where you have a client, lord of the manor relationship, where the serf has got particular rights, but he has also got particular obligations. But that is distinctly different from Mtumwa. Okay, so now, how would we then apply this in terms of this construction as such? Did serfdom exist in Swahili coastal society as different from utumwa? And I think this is a discussion perhaps that we could have. But there's also a scholar, Katrin Bromber, I don't know whether she's here, she was here yesterday. She has also looked at the word ustaarabu, okay, in a book edited by Roman Loimer and Zizerman, in terms of the newspaper Mambo Leo. And she has looked at ustaarabu in a way that how the term has been used by local correspondents. So we are talking of my point number 2 there, i.e. from the inside, used by local correspondents of Mambo Leo. And she has shown in her article that actually, very subtly, the colonial government wanted sort of the debate to move of ustaarabu, the definition, to move and to be widened its meaning to focus on a matter of interest to them. So they were defining ustaarabu, which in the dictionary was also defined as one of the characteristics of Uungwana, to focus on uraia. And what is very interesting in Katrin Bromber's article is that a woman also sent her comments, and she wanted to change this word ustaarabu to also incorporate the treatment which men mete out, so to speak, to women. What is the men's treatment of women? And she was trying to talk of that in terms of ustaarabu, especially in terms of their education and development. In other words, what she was saying in this article, that Mstaarabu is one who looks after the education and development of women. But men immediately replied her, and the editor simply, as Catherine says, simply moved the discussion on to other things. So the point is that Bromber is basing her views firmly on those of the local people as such. Okay, and finally, because as I said, I'm keen to have a discussion. What we find is that Bromber also, she defines Uungwana as well, not only Ustara, but also Uungwana as urbanity, freedom, and high social standing. So what I've been trying to do in these few minutes. In these few minutes, I've been trying to do two things. One is to say that when we are dealing with a concept, particularly a concept that is fundamental to the identity and definition of a people, we need to look at how it has sort of moved in history and how and who actually is defining it. That's number one. And number two, that we need to make explicit the type of reasoning that we have in terms of actually positing the X factor, which is our construction or even deconstruction of God. So I am very eager that we should have some discussion.
Farouq, Topan would like to have some comments and questions maybe.
Novel in Kiswahili, which I read I think last year or 2 years ago, called Kwaheri Islam Maganga, which in a way is a very unique novel in Kiswahili because it deals with the pre-colonial era. In fact, it ends around 1884. But it deals with slavery, slave trade. And there it was clear, at least in the way he was using it, that Uungwana, there was an Arab slave owner. Uungwana was the one who was assistant to the Arab owner. Uungwana were the ones who were helping or who were employed who were not slaves, but were helping the slave owner, Mwarabu. Okay? So that's why I'm interested in this contrast between Uungwana and slave. But clearly in that novel, it is used in the context of someone who is not quite Mustaarabu, because there's Arab owner, but who is Uungwana, obviously, because he's almost next to the slave owner, but he himself is not a slave. So I was wondering whether you could comment on that, as well as, of course, the word Ustaarabu itself, yes, and its relationship to Uungwana.
Yeah, over time, the term Uungwana has been used in various ways. One of them, which is documented also by Alan, which he gives this very much Roman translation of a patrician, refers to the group who are wenyeji, i.e. the citizens, the owners of a place, and distinguish them from Arabs who are immigrants who have come in. So I would presume, I haven't read that, but I would presume that what he is talking about is that you would have the slave trader who is from elsewhere, and that one of the upper class, or even not, but just who is a Uungwana, one of the would be then assistant to that. Now, there is a third word that I want to introduce in order to answer your second question, and that is the word utamaduni. So you have Uungwana, mstaarabu, mtamaduni. Okay, and politically it is interesting how, for instance, Nyerere has used or not used these words. For instance, the word politically that was very much used in Tanzania, for instance, has been the word utamaduni, mtamaduni wa Mwafrika. Okay. And I haven't done research on this, so this is just an hypothesis that I would like to give, is that the idea, just as in the 1930s we found the priest role moving away from this Arabized sort of thing, I think in that period of Tanzanian, just after independence, there was perhaps an effort to move away from the word mstaarabu and to get to utamaduni. And therefore you have that. The difference between Uungwana and mstaarabu is the same. There is an overlap a huge overlap between these two words. But my understanding, and others can comment here, that is mstaarabu is very much linked to acts also which are pragmatic, down to earth. In terms of everyday activities, you can use the word mstaarabu. Just as the Mamboleo lady wanted it to be recognized, mstaarabu, as somebody who actually looks after the interests of women as well. I suppose you could say that of Uungwana as well. Uungwana is a Bantu term which presumably would have been present on the East African coast before the word mstaarabu was coined.